Hi everybody. So it's been a while since I did my last video. Just had a lot going on, so I moved. As you can see, I've got a new office room, much better lighting coming from the window in front of me, so you'll be able to see me a lot better. But in addition to that, just moving, I got sick during the move. I'm still recovering from a little bit. We've got a new cat, which we are dealing with. So a lot of stuff going on. Haven't really had the time to make a ton of videos or anything, but I am trying to get back to that now. So this week's topic is basically, I talked in a previous video about how sometimes there are ways to do fitness in ways that are not healthy for you in the long term. And, in particular, when you're trying to optimize your body for some kind of athletic performance goal, that's not necessarily going to be the healthiest thing for you in the long term. And a lot of the problems revolve around steroids, but then some of the problems can also revolve around things like, purposefully eating to gain weight and so on, simply because those aren't necessarily the healthiest thing that you can do. So in response, I got a question from a viewer, which I will, put up on the screen in a second. Basically, it goes like this. Question for the vlog, which I realize may take its own entry. I've noticed that the way some of the folks at my fight gym talk about bulking and cutting, especially cutting, is really similar to other diet culture weight loss things, with some of them talking about restricting bad foods, etc. And I feel weird about it because my background is in the health at every size, intuitive eating kind of paradigm. I was wondering what your opinion was on the boundaries between cutting and forms of weight loss that are less healthy. On a lighter side, I've been using deadlift every day over the summer. Opposite seasons, I've been enjoying it a lot. Take the balance between clear scaffolding and auto-regulation. So of course, that's my program, Deadlift Every Day. You can get that for free if you go to my website at www.gains.af. So, pick that up if you're interested in deadlifting a lot. I'm going to kind of bring this into a larger discussion that I think this question was really intending to ask. Because I think that this is a really good topic in a general sense. So what's touching on is the concept of clean eating. So clean eating is the sort of diet mentality, which basically, probably deserves its own video separate from this one. But, basically, people have these dietary approaches that's basically, okay, you eat good foods and you avoid bad foods, and that's how you win. Basically, that's how you, achieve your goals. And that's not necessarily an accurate way of doing things. That's how most, sort of crappy diets are built, is by, basically just restricting the kinds of food that you can eat very aggressively. But, it is useful for some people, because for some people, they have certain problem foods. And if you take away those foods, it really does make a huge difference. Well, for other people, they don't have, necessarily the same kinds of problems with certain kinds of foods. And restricting those will cause, sort of psychological issues where they sort of ingrain this, this deep moral mentality to it, in which things become good and evil. And that becomes, a bit problematic in terms of, having a healthy relationship with food. So to talk about, sort of bodybuilding, bodybuilding is a sport more than any other sport that's about diet. So you're going to build most of the muscle mass that you build from your training, but your diet is going to play a very significant role, because, for example, when you are bulking, you want to focus on making sure that you've got enough protein, that you have enough calories to make sure that you're building mass. And then, of course, when you're cutting, you have to do, more, dietary manipulation to lose weight and make sure that you're maintaining as much muscle mass as possible, losing as much fat mass as possible. Basically, no other sport does this to this extent. When we're talking about something like, basically like combat sports, people might need to cut a weight class. You're talking about powerlifting, people might need to cut a weight class, or, conversely, maybe they need to bump up a weight class, because that's just sort of in keeping with their longer term training goals. And so, there is a bit of bulking or a bit of cutting, but it's not, quite to the same extent. It's not sort of this the back and forth that you really see in bodybuilding. And then on top of that, I don't know, like football, soccer, basketball, like, no one has to worry about their diet that much, not nearly as much as you do in bodybuilding. And so in these other kinds of sports, you can often get away without having to think too much about your diet. Like, yes, you generally want to eat healthy. You want to generally be eating the amount of protein that you need to sustain, your level of activity, the level of calories that you need. But you're not worrying so much about, doing these big swings in terms of what you're doing from week to week and month to month. You're not thinking about it so intensely. And so, people, something that people maybe don't realize all the time is that when you look at basically someone who's jacked that you see on the internet, who's shredded, who's aesthetic or whatever, basically they only look like that because they've gone through, very significant manipulations of their diet to get there. That's from focusing on their diet. You can build a lot of muscle mass from training. You can get really fast, you can get really strong, and so on. But no matter what, unless you either have just A, really good genetics and you just are like that, or B, you have to focus on your diet to really get lean, while being, strong or while having a lot of muscle or whatever it is. And so that's why most athletes don't look like bodybuilders, because most athletes don't put that level of attention into their diet. And bodybuilding isn't necessarily healthy. As I've discussed in the previous video, steroids are a big heart health issue, risk of early death. Purposefully eating to gain weight, not necessarily a great thing. Cutting a lot of weight, also not necessarily a great thing. Can potentially cause or worsen metabolic issues. But something, more importantly, cutting on its own sort of leads to these problems. So in the past, when we were, when bodybuilding was younger, when it, we didn't have as much of, or any at all scientific evidence behind, the best way to train for things, people would just sort of make stuff up, right? Like they would just be like, oh, this diet is the superior diet. I saw this guy do this diet, so I'm doing that, or whatever. And, those weren't necessarily well-researched or good ideas. Very often those were crappy starvation diets. Another thing that bodybuilders care a lot about is water retention. And so they do things to manipulate their water retention before they go on stage, some of which are not necessarily healthy. And so they would rely on sort of this mishmash of mixed ideas that they had gotten from everywhere, to achieve the kind of goals that they wanted. And a lot of these methods, carried some kind of health risks. There, again, issues with metabolism, issues with water stuff, restrictive dieting, getting this sort of religious or sort of, very deeply ingrained psychological feeling about good and evil related to diet and so on. And something that really sort of opened my eyes up a while ago was, I can't even remember what study this was, but basically I read this study and they were kind of examining what bodybuilders looked like when they showed up on stage in terms of their health markers. So basically, they'd take a bodybuilder who is just about to compete, they would, take some blood work, do some hormone profiling, whatever, and they would basically say, what do these people look like? And the answer was that they looked like crap. Basically a lot of them had some kind of nutrient deficiencies because they've been on very restrictive diets that didn't allow them to eat a lot of things. We have the common joke of, it's like broccoli and rice and chicken and that's it. But that's a joke and, people don't really do that much, but some people do, some people really internalize those sort of memes or those sort of ideas, too quickly or too fully. And that's, that causes problems. And, from starving yourself for a long time, which is basically what you're doing when you're cutting, you're also basically just tanking your hormone profiles. So, these people are feeling weak, they're feeling lethargic, they're not feeling great, because they've basically been putting their body in that cutting mode for a long time. And so basically when people show up on that bodybuilding stage, that's when they're basically the least healthy that they're going to be. Because again, they've just been putting their bodies through a lot recently in terms of, continuing to train, in terms of cutting calories and restricting their diet and so on. And, you pair that with stuff like, okay, they're trying to manipulate their water weight to, do X, Y, and Z and so on. That can be, not necessarily the healthiest thing in the world. Of course, they look great, and of course, they're able to win competitions, but people don't see that. The average person, looking at a picture on Instagram doesn't look at, this guy who's showing up on stage looking jacked and shredded, and they don't say, oh, that guy probably has terrible hormone profiles right now. Nobody cares. They care about what they see on the outside and what you look like. And so that's this problem, because we conflate that with health. We conflate that restriction and that phase where you're at that most restricted point with, being in the best shape, being the most jacked, and so on. Luckily, we're at a place where we are starting to sort out the good ways to do things and the bad ways to do things. There's been a lot more effort put into science in terms of sport and in terms of fitness and in terms of just how your body reacts to these different sorts of scenarios in the last, 10, 20 years. So there's a lot better, there's a lot more research, there's a lot better research, and the research we have is starting to tease out, okay, here's the right way to do things, here's the wrong way to do things, here's how to mitigate those risks as much as possible. And so because we have that scientific evidence coming in, that is making things better. We're getting to the point where, we have what we call the evidence-based fitness industry. We have a lot of coaches and a lot of athletes who are now following methods that are a lot easier on their bodies, methods that can still achieve them the same results, but don't push them, so much in that unhealthy direction. In general, we find that, you don't have to restrict as much as, people used to think. You don't have to eat nearly as much protein as people used to think. One thing that really helps when you're cutting is that very often you have that risk of nutrient deficiency simply because you're eating fewer calories, and that means there's less food to spread out all your micronutrients over. So of course, you might want to take a multivitamin, you might want to take some additional supplements. And so long as you're doing that, you can often sort of, again, mitigate the biggest risks. You can feel pretty good. You can make sure that you're, treating your body as good as possible. Something that used to happen when, basically we have this very typical story about someone who's a bodybuilder and they show up on stage and they're feeling like crap. And then after their competition is over, they sit down and they eat a crap ton of ice cream or a crap ton of pizza or, whatever, a crap ton of carbs. There was that big thing where The Rock had his cheat meal like a few years ago after he was like, in a very serious training phase. And so then he sat down with it was like a pizza and some ice cream and like a stack of pancakes or something. We have this sort of, okay, now that the competition is over, you immediately start binging on, whatever unhealthy foods you've been avoiding this whole time. And that's not necessarily a great thing either, simply because, it's this huge swing in terms of what your body is used to. You're really shocking it a little bit by giving it so much. And so, that used to be the way that people did things. Nowadays, we have the concept of reverse dieting. So the concept of reverse dieting is basically that you're in this state where you've been, calorie restricted, your diet has been a bit more restricted for a while. And instead of simply, suddenly hitting your body with everything all at once by doing this huge binge, this huge cheat, what you're doing is you're just slowly, building your way back up to where you were before. And the idea with this is that you're essentially slowly helping rebuild your metabolism. You're slowly adding more calories little by little. You're slowly adding in, more of the stuff that you want to eat. You're helping ease your body into that process. There's a lot of, I think there's still a lot of debate about sort of the usefulness of reverse dieting. I know that one of the big sort of complaints a while ago was that it sort of pathologizes the concept of recovery from, your cutting diet. Basically it makes it, it treats it a little too seriously. Like, oh, you should just be able to slowly start eating the things that you want without having to make that into a diet, without having to make it, this rigid structure, but again, some people react better to structure and some people don't. Some people react better to sort of very light diets and, sort of very general approaches to things, while other people just really, really love the numbers and the spreadsheets and, getting really, really specific into those things. So I think that that's certainly an approach that helps for some people as well, although it may or may not be perfect for everybody. I think that the biggest problem that we have is the way that we've inserted this idea that those people who are the most jacked, who are, the most shredded, are the most healthy, or they're the most desirable. When the reality is that that's typically when they're at their least healthiest. That's when they've been putting their bodies through a lot for the last few months to get into a certain, contest ready shape for a very specific kind of athletic competition that doesn't necessarily have to be the way that we all train or think or, aspire to. We can just lift weights, we can just build muscle, we can just focus on getting stronger and, feeling good without having to get, down to, 5% body fat, 10% body fat, whatever. You can sit at a bit higher percentage body fat and not really worry too much about your diet and just enjoy the fact that you're training and just enjoy the fact that you're making progress there. We don't have to make it that everyone has to be this ideal of this shredded, lean, aesthetic, super jacked person. And we're bombarded with these images, and it helps, or it doesn't help. It causes people to internalize this image of the way they should be, and I think that has a negative effect on the culture. And I would like to emphasize again that at the end of the day, everyone is going to be different. Everyone has a different set of genetics. Everyone has a different set of everyone's coming from a different place. And you really shouldn't look at other people and, base what you want to do and how you want to train specifically on the way that they look or the way that they train or so on, because that's not necessarily healthy. You should be focusing on finding goals that matter for you and sort of following them in your own, just going your own way, following your own path, following them in your own way, and, not worrying too much about what you see everybody else doing all the time. We see these people who are ostensibly in great shape and they have no intention to compete, but they want to do some kind of restrictive diet, or they want to do some kind of restrictive program to look in peak shape because they think that that's the way it has to be in order to be successful. We have people who want to conform to that look. Maybe they don't have the greatest genetics in the world, so maybe they can't really achieve that look, but, attempting to chase that look is really holding them back from just sort of falling in love with the process and really following their own journey to its conclusion, rather than, trying to hope for this sort of impossible ideal. In some cases, people get sort of suckered into things where, basically any unscrupulous scammer looking to make a quick buck can come in and say, oh, well, I've got the perfect secret solution to get, those unattainable goals. And it's this diet or this exercise program, which is usually shit. But, they're selling it to you for $10 or whatever. And so you say, oh, yeah, okay, I'll try that out. And of course it doesn't work out. But then, that person has, $10 more than they had, before this whole mess. So another problem is basically, what we call hypergymnasia, or, basically anorexia athletica. Basically, this refers to the tendency for certain people to have this very obsessive focus on their fitness to the extent of being really, really, really sort of compulsive about their diet, compulsively focusing on, basically their amount of muscle mass, looking good, and so on. And this is a problem because, that's an unhealthy behavior that is in many ways normalized by, sort of the diet and fitness culture that we have. And that's not great for people. Once we sort of normalize those bad parts, it makes them look, less serious, less threatening, less concerning than they really are. So, at the end of the day, I always advise people, cutting weight is useful. It's yes, it can be done in the right way. Yes, it can be done in a healthy way. It can be meaningful. It can be sort of, in keeping with, sort of your athletic goals or your physique goals or whatever, especially if you're sort of, a pretty serious lifter and you want to just take things to the next level. That's all great. But the reality is that it's certainly not for everybody. It's certainly not healthy for everybody. A lot of people don't have the sort of the know-how to do it right. And so, would I recommend that everyone, does, sort of bulking and cutting cycles like a bodybuilder? Probably not. it wouldn't be useful for a lot of people in the slightest, and it would be, potentially causing a lot of problems with eating disorders, potentially causing a lot of problems with, again, sort of diving into the unhealthy end of fitness. There are certainly ways to cut weight that are more healthy. As I've mentioned before, we've got a lot more of the research coming out. We're doing a lot better in terms of understanding it than we used to. I would say that, you want to make sure that you're eating a lot of protein. You want to make sure that you're eating a lot of fiber. If you do those two things, generally you're going to be able to eat and you're going to be able to feel full, because fiber and protein tend to be pretty filling. So you're not going to feel like you're starving yourself all the time. You still want to be able to eat the foods that you like. You still want to be able to eat a little bit of junk food here and there. Have a scoop of ice cream occasionally. Have some crappy carbs just because it makes you feel good. Whatever. You want to have a program that allows you to meet your goals without without cutting out everything that you enjoy in life, and without sort of pushing you into this corner where you start to get compulsive about the way that you eat and the way that you think about eating. Aside from that, again, eat a multivitamin, take a multivitamin, help cover up your bases. Another thing that I highly recommend for people is that you take diet breaks, basically kind of akin to the way that we have the concept of a deload in lifting. You take a week off to let your body recover. That's basically exactly what you're doing with a diet break. So essentially you're taking, a week periodically where you eat at sort of maintenance level calories instead of eating, to lose. And what that does is that basically just helps your body recover a little bit, your leptin levels recover a little bit, your hormones recover a little bit, and that basically leads to much better results over time and much less risk of things going totally haywire, and really causing serious health issues. So I do recommend taking a slower approach. I do recommend that you take breaks periodically, and I do recommend that you work with a coach or you work with a nutritionist, so that you kind of know what you're doing, and you're basically minimizing your risk of actually causing any serious problems. So that's really it for that topic this week. I unfortunately do not have any Q&A questions because I've been bad about asking for them. But that will be it for this week, and I am sure that I will have plenty of questions to cover next week. So until then, have a good week. Bye.